Borderline Disorder: Symptoms, Deceptions, and Treatment by John Kirshen. Narrated by Sarah Owens. Chapter 1: The Appeal of Borderline Personality. At times, when people learn that I have an interest in dealing with clients with a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, they're confounded. Aren't these the fatal attraction people who drive you crazy? Specialists could occasionally proclaim, "Oh, I won't treat those clients," even though they are. They just haven't figured it out yet. When represented in the media with the borderline label, these characters show histrionic, devastating, egotistical behavior, bet high drama, or outrageous comedy. Derisive descriptions of someone using psychiatric lingo is now less often. He is absolutely schizo, or manic, or narcissistic, etc. Instead, I more regularly hear, "My first wife or husband was a borderline." It appears that most acrimonious separations apparently arise from a relationship with a borderline. Although it is true that some of these people can be unreasonably demanding, self-sabotaging, and very tough, they also represent a group of patients who can be rewarding to engage with and make great strides towards improvement. Unlike some clients, for example those with ADHD, who could respond instantly and exceptionally to health treatment, borderlines travel a longer roadway to healing, although most significantly enhance. Although it may be a strenuous journey, it can be an interesting privilege to accompany these individuals on their adventure, tons of whom have shown their strong resilience by enduring horrific past mistreatment and outright abuse. I have had the honor of working together with people who started with restricted resources and education to achieve high levels of success. Borderlines with more positive prognostic functions, like intelligence, attractiveness, creativity, self-control, and a supportive environment, possess the potential to accomplish more. And the ones with less lucky endowments can still rise to a more rewarding life. When these people pursue change and help from good friends, family, and experts, they show great guts and strength in dealing with and learning to handle the unpleasant elements of their lives. Such people can be accepted not as defenseless waifs, or demanding bitches, or sadistic manipulators, but as strong individuals aiming admirably for a better life. Chapter 2: Society's Changing View of Borderline Personality. The concept of borderline personality disorder, or BPD, has evolved significantly since the designation was first defined over 70 years ago. In 1980, when BPD was formally specified in the DSM-3, most experts viewed it as a health diagnosis bestowed on difficult, constant, pain-in-the-ass clients. However, it stayed unknown to the general public. The original edition of our book, "I Hate You, Do Not Leave Me: Understanding the Borderline Personality," in 1989, was one of the first referenced books directed to a basic readership as well as to experts. Beginning in the 1990s and into the 21st century, other books on BPD have been released. Several of these are memoirs written by non-professionals describing relatives, lovers, and themselves with borderline symptoms. During this time, greater public consciousness of BPD has emerged. Films, TV programs, and other fictional media recommendations to BPD often portray those afflicted as hugely crazy, often self-destructive, and at times dangerous. Imaginary characters with borderline quirks can be attractive, dramatic, and vibrant enough to stimulate a story, but they're often portrayed as the bad guy of the piece. BPD is lumped with schizophrenia, bipolar illness, and drug abuse to clarify erratic behavior. Over the past 10 years, research studies have shown that in contrast to former presumptions, clients with BPD get better. They are no longer considered issue clients who never ever improve and whom medical professionals should try to keep from. Some treatment approaches have been developed specifically resolving borderline symptomatology. Clinical understanding, though, continues to surpass conceptualizations by the public. Media referrals continue to define BPD as a dark, hazardous label for crazy behavior. Ultimately, general comprehension of BPD will catch up with scientific knowledge. For several years in the past, imaginary characters who committed violent acts would usually be labeled schizophrenic, though few people with the analysis are ever violent. Sometime in the future, BPD will also be recalibrated in public awareness in a more reasonable way. Chapter 3. Can people with borderline personalities prosper in life? My comprehension of BPD has grown considerably from discussions with a doctor whom I describe as HO, who struggles with borderline personality disorder. Whereas my medical practice primarily includes clients from the middle and upper reaches of the financial spectrum, seeking assist with relationship problems, depression, and anxiety, HO has worked professionally dealing with young women from the lower rungs of the financial ladder who struggle with borderline problems. In her remarks right below, she draws our attention to the predicament of these patients. Our conversations, achieved through email exchanges, concentrate on the awful obstacles faced by women, and men too, with borderline disorders. My heart heads out to all who struggle with BPD, as the extreme feelings that rise within them can be terrifyingly unpleasant. I share here, with her approval, HO's newest observations. She has been writing to me about the effect of borderline personality disorder on the sufferer and also on family members. It is truly heartbreaking how much hurt and misery mental disorder creates each day, is it not? I have seen the illness of borderline character from both sides, both from the viewpoint of a sufferer, myself, and from the perspective of those that deal with and have been hurt by them, including my partner. I see how both sides are deeply hurt, those affected straight from living the hellish truths of experiencing BPD, and the non-BPDs who might feel horrified, abused, terrified, and who can even be criminally hurt by those with the disorder. Generally, individuals with borderline personality disorder are incredibly unhappy people. With their hyper-reactive amygdala and other inefficient brain aspects that cause super intense emotional reactivity, usually triggered at first by maltreatment from borderline personality disordered parents, women and men with BPD live lives identified by great obstacles. In their younger years, lots of them have suffered abuse. As they turn into adulthood, and especially if they're on the lower rungs of the economic ladder, they could experience little chance, great distress, sadness, loneliness, and a distressed teenage years. They might begin in adulthood with damaged academic and career pursuits, plus desperate efforts at self-medication with drugs and alcohol. Their dysfunctional, hyper-reactive emotional reactivity might mess up even their most determined positive efforts to establish lives of wellness. Overly intense psychological reactions potentially can ultimately wreak damage of essentially every little thing they try to do. BPD patients definitely can become victims of their health problem. The women and men with substantial borderline personality disorders, and especially the ones who at the same time suffer from economic limitations, can experience such extreme emotions that they commit felonies. They can stalk, abuse, scare, steal, ruin property, set fire to, and even, extremely rarely, could hit or kill someone in a fit of rage. Financial battles make life more difficult, and lower-income folks have less access to reliable psychological treatment. At the exact same time, BPD victims of any income level are at risk for wreaking awful turmoil in their lives of others who surround them. Chaos primarily of the psychological kind. Their fast eruptions of anger and speed even to rage, typically based on misinterpretations of situations, can lead them to deal with others improperly, including and particularly relatives. Anger induces a belief that what I want is holy and what you want is unimportant. That is, profound narcissism. This momentary narcissism, in turn, can cause people with BPD to become blind and deaf to the suffering they induce in close-by others. Huge personal strength, plus insight and persistence, may be needed to stop psychological outbursts from emerging. In sum, people who struggle with a borderline personality disorder could take advantage of others, and at the same time are themselves victims, tortured by their too intense psychological reactions. The difficulties they deal with are significant and real, yet hope is on the horizon. What can be finished with this dilemma? One particular way to make some progress might be to look at BPD as what it actually is, unquestionably shown by empirical research, a serious impairment. It can be an impairment that affects sufferers' quality of life, how far they will get in their profession, and their capability to sustain close relationships. The impairment can hinder their intimate relationships, preventing their attempts to find a partner, increasing the probability that if they do marry, the union will end up with a divorce. The psychological storms brought on by BPD's excessively reactive emotional system also increases the possibility that they will be challenged with regard to raising mentally healthy kids. With understanding of their disorder, and especially with efficient therapy help, these obstacles can be gotten rid of. Regrettably, though, therapists generally deal with only the top and greatest functioning of the iceberg of borderline personality patients. With costs of upwards of $100 plus per hour, psychotherapists typically work primarily with the experts and upper-level company folks who somehow, despite their brains having actually become wired problematically, have made it in life enough to be able to pay for treatment. In addition, BPD sufferers from higher income groups generally have enough education to purchase and learn from self-help books that teach how to handle the depression and anxiety, as well as the anger induced by BPD. Lower-income BPD sufferers could have less access to these self-help choices, significantly if they grew up with negative school experiences and a lack of confidence towards reading. In my work as a physician in a public health service, I have realized that the more lucky BPD victims, the people who receive extensive enough help to decrease the ravages of the disease, represent a tiny fraction of folks with a BPD diagnosis. The quiet bulk are hidden in the shadows of our society. Often in alarming economic straits, from under- and unemployment, these patients either become profoundly lonely or endure repeated abusive relationships. A lot of people subsist on disability checks or end up homeless, institutionalized, or locked up. Destitution, institutionalization, or imprisonment can be regrettable outcomes for women with severe BPD. Men who have been diagnosed with antisocial disorder may, in fact, be showing the male version of what in women we call BPD. The normal outcome for these low-income, personality disorder guys is also extremely miserable. With little to no treatment options, their roadway of life too often causes jail time. How sad that our civilization so improperly understands the nature of their issues, reacting with penalty, when nurturing, teaching, and psychological help are so frantically needed. Less economically advantaged individuals with borderline personality disorders, through no fault of their own, the women and also the guys, have been dealt a really severe hand in life. Who will help them? Maybe they could have played better at the poor hand they have been dealt if someone had taught them to understand their psychological disability. That is what Marcia Linehan has been attempting to do. Her programs teach those with BPD first how to stop digging an even deeper hole for themselves if they want to get out of it. Strong mental health services could go a long way to giving these patients a chance to enjoy more rewarding lives. Meanwhile, on a brighter note, in spite of my own violent upbringing and my still tyrannical emotional turmoils, I'm succeeding. While I struggle, I do dominate. For example, I have found ways to practice my medical occupation in ways which allow me to decrease my interactions with clients. With work that needs me to face only just a few interpersonal circumstances, and for that reason, psychological needs, I have succeeded in becoming an extremely appreciated contributor in my field. In addition, I feel profoundly happy for my exceptionally comprehending husband. His active participation in raising our children helps in a major way. My grasp of circumstances that I really need to keep from, plus skills for handling situations that otherwise would have overwhelmed me, also have contributed to safeguarding our family from the devastations of my health problem. My kids are growing and developing incredibly robustly every day. As a couple, my wife and I are breaking the chain of generational transference of BPD that goes way back in my family. For my current good luck, in addition to my spouse, I profoundly thank both my own research studies of BPD and some of the mental health professionals who have helped me to learn how to manage my psychological handicap. Yet, who will help the many other women and guys with borderline personality disorders who have less resources to support them? I do motivate all with BPD tendencies to seek out help. Community psychological health, as well as private psychological health care options, do exist. Seek them out. Chapter 4: Therapist Personality and Borderline Personality. The relationship between a therapist and a borderline patient is crucial. Most importantly, the therapist must recognize and understand that his patient is dealing with BPD and the accompanying clusters of signs. A clinician must have the ability to endure complex paradoxes in the therapy comparable to the ones in which the borderline patient struggles. Just as the borderline tries to navigate between extreme psychological swings, such as happy to miserable and love to hate, the practitioner must balance flexibility and development with consistency and maintenance of boundaries. The therapist must adjust to the changing needs of the patient, yet also present dependable, consistent acceptance. Support and empathy must be stabilized with confrontation of genuine, practical realities. A therapist must possess enough confidence to hold up against potential obstacles of proficiency and caring, yet not be so big-headed as to thoughtlessly dismiss the patient's problems. Maintaining a good sense of humor may help retain a sense of proportion in dealing with crisis situations. The treater must be more vulnerable to her own responses to the patient. Countertransference. A current research study in the American Journal of Psychiatry from January 2014 checked out therapist responses to their borderline clients. Patients with BPD, more than any other character profile, aroused more powerful responses from clinicians. Feelings of vulnerability, inadequacy, guilt, anxiety, and poor organization were endorsed by these specialists. Some also experienced issues of being over-involved and making unique allowances that breached boundaries, while other people responded against such emotions of actual responsibility by holding on to more stiff limitations. The study also demonstrated that therapists' irregular reactions usually showed the variations in patient conduct. When the patient was mad, the clinician was more likely to either retreat from conflict for fear of infuriating the patient even more, or end up being more aggressive with the analysis. More beneficial emotions were experienced toward borderlines who worked at a higher level. The optimum patient-therapist fit happens when both parties work toward the exact same objectives and develop shared trust. Just as the borderline aims to attain comprehension of his psychological variations, the therapist also must recognize the responses that she experiences. In this way, the optimal collaboration in treatment is established. Chapter 5. The Borderline Ages. In one research study, both groups of symptomatic patients displayed high levels of functioning, disability, and accompanying other medical diagnoses, such as depression or substance abuse. Younger grown-ups, aged 25 or younger, tended to be more impulsive, self-injuring, substance-abusing, and more emotionally labile. Older adults, 45 and older, reported greater social dysfunction, more lifetime hospitalizations, and emotions of persistent empty space. Borderlines who do recuperate over time report a much different experience. Academics investigating long-term development of borderline clients report that the ones who are considered totally recuperated are more likely to wed and have children. Those patients marry later in life and are less likely to get separated than those who stay symptomatic. Successful marriage and parenting are related to higher IQ, lack of childhood sexual abuse, no history of abuse of substances, and extroversion. These studies suggest that older and more youthful borderlines might present with different problems. We know that the majority of these clients improve considerably, but the ones who make commitments like marriage when more youthful and while acutely ill are less likely to sustain healthy relationships. Like many illnesses, enabling time to recover may be the best medicine. Chapter 6. Men and Women with Borderline Personality Disorder. The term borderline, used to specify borderline personality disorder, or BPD, has entered the mainstream these days, with television movie of the weeks sensationalizing borderlines and making them appear like unsafe, unique animals to gaze at, fear, and condemn. Television manufacturers really love a lot of the serious mental conditions because manufacturers are always aiming to fill the screen with as much dramatic action as possible. If you know at the very least a little bit about BPD, you know that some of its signs include severe behavior, which is usually deadly. The issue? Borderlines are real people with psychological injuries. We shouldn't turn them into inefficient caricatures. For years, I really believe we misunderstood BPD, especially with regard to sex differences in BPD. While the field historically really believed that women experience BPD as much as 3 times the frequency of men, current research by Grant and Associates in 2008 suggests that men and women show a similar occurrence for the disorder. 5.6% amongst guys, 6.2% among women. The researchers of the recent research study, though, also suggest that the expression of the disorder manifests in a different way in men and women. Anecdotally, in my work in inpatient psychiatric systems, I have realized that there are distinctions in the way borderline men and borderline women approach the world and those around them. More importantly, research validates the differences. For instance, Zlotnick and Associates in 2002 found gender distinctions with regard to the kind of impulsive conduct in which borderline males and females engage. They discovered that men presented more substance abuse, antisocial features, and periodic explosive disorder, while women presented more eating disorders. When it comes to self-harm conduct, I was taught in graduate school that women are cutters, another essentially negative, judgment-prone term, while borderline guys do not tend to cause physical damage to themselves. Yet, Omaya and coworkers in 2008 suggest that men and women actually participate in a similar rate of self-harm conduct, which includes cutting, bruising, head-banging, and biting. Given the probability that borderline men and women are comparable in some ways and different in others, the overall results beg the question: do borderline males and females differ in the severity of their borderline character? That's no easy question to answer, but Zlotnick discovered that both males and females presented for treatment with equal levels of psychological distress. When it comes to looking for psychological health treatment, both men and women seek out mental health services at high rates throughout their lifetime. Nonetheless, Goodman and coworkers found out that guys with BPD are more likely than women to seek out substance abuse rehab services, but not as very likely to look for pharmacotherapy and psychological therapy services. Finally, as we consider sex distinctions, I should resolve the fact that some readers could have some questions about what's happening to the BPD diagnosis given the new edition of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness, or DSM-5. It is worth keeping in mind because the categorization for BPD practically changed. According to Stetka and Correll's A Guide to the DSM-5, 2013, in the field trials carried out in preparation for the new DSM revision, BPD was the only personality disorder that had good inter-rater reliability, meaning more than one therapist would examine the exact same individual and both concur that the symptoms are the same and were also consistent with the criteria as detailed by the model for the BPD diagnosis in the last DSM. In the end, the exact same personality disorder models were kept for DSM-5 that were included in the DSM-4, though Area 3 of the new handbook includes discussion of a new hybrid model of identifying all the personality disorders. While the existing BPD classification could not be impacted much by gender distinctions, I do really believe that the next work group should seriously examine the frequency rates of BPD in men and women, in addition to specific ways in which the expression of the disorder might reveal itself in men and women. Chapter 7. The Borderline Chameleon. Changing Identities. Changing Medical Diagnoses. With the new year come pledges to modify your life. Resolutions are made to begin, stop, and change. Begin dieting, stop smoking, change jobs. For someone with borderline personality disorder, or BPD, change is less purposely determined. Transformation for such a person is more reflexive, less practiced. The borderline chameleon changes depending upon the environment and who is present, continuously having a hard time to fit in. A Republican among Republicans, a Democrat amongst Democrats, the borderline does not have a stable, consistent collection of beliefs and principles. This rising and falling identity makes it tough to establish a firm sense of self. Just as somebody with BPD struggles to stabilize a coherent, reputable identity, the clinician contends with developing a diagnosis which might be as evasive. The chameleon disguises of BPD implicate numerous illnesses. Could mood swings suggest significant depression or bipolar illness? Does devastating impulsivity presume attention deficit disorder or cover over substance abuse? A series of impaired relationships. Perhaps that suggests anxiety disorder or post-traumatic stress. What about feelings of paranoia or unreality? Is it schizophrenia? Am I borderline, or is it sometimes I just act insane? BPD is so tough to accurately identify just because it intersects with other disorders in several ways. Usually, it could exist together, but be submerged in the wake of a more prominent disorder like depression. Borderline signs may not become discernible until after treatment of the other disease is set in motion. Secondly, BPD's chameleon disguise may simulate another syndrome and induce an incorrect assessment. In such a way, a cursory assessment of mood swings might start a misapplied label of bipolar illness. Alternatively, BPD may camouflage another disease, be installed incorrectly as the primary analysis. Just as the borderline person is a chameleon, constantly modifying identity, so is the BPD analysis. Separating the syndrome from other conditions can be almost as challenging a job as the struggle to dominate the disease. Chapter 8. The Cost of Loving a Person with Borderline or Narcissistic Disorder. In my clinical experience, I have discovered that having a relationship with someone who has severe narcissistic or borderline personality disorder often causes one of the most distressing relationship experiences a person can have. Basically, the closer you are to a person with one of these personalities, the even worse the emotional injury. Whether it's a romantic relationship, a parent or caretaker and child, or friends, the experience can take a toll. First off, consider the following questions. Do men and women with extreme narcissism or borderline character plan to trigger such pain? Are they evil, or do they get off on playing mind games and hurting people? In one word, no. Females and males with these characteristics became this way gradually. Usually, it's the repercussion of an adult or other authority figure mistreating them and teaching them distorted lessons about what to anticipate from people and the world in general. In basic terms, one or more persons in a position of authority and close distance seriously tinkered these individuals' minds. I have found out that people with narcissistic and borderline character usually require years of treatment to resolve the distorted programming instilled years ago. Narcissism and borderline personality are different in critical ways. With narcissism, the individual feels remarkably consciously, meaning this is what they tell themselves. The experience of liking a narcissist is puzzling. Many people near to them see examples of how the narcissist actually must feel incredibly insecure, despite how remarkable and self-loving they act upon the surface area. With borderline personality, the individual fears desertion in close relationships and cycles through severe emotions as they go through everyday life. This experience, too, is confusing for loved ones who should think, "Wait, I'm right here and not going anywhere. How are you so sure I'm out the door?" It feels like the ones with borderline character are convinced you are leaving, as if they have information you don't. Those close to people with borderline personality often feel shocked or even scared by the emotional intensity that comes with their fear of desertion. Loved ones try to make sense of fear that simply does not make reasonable sense. While narcissism and borderline personality disorder are different, resemblances remain. With both, the individual always works hard and feels uncomfortable with vulnerability. Those characters require that a romantic partner serve the interests of the disordered individuals. Simply put, it is truly not about you the majority of the time. It has to do with them. If you challenge them or try to hold them accountable, they will snap and punish you. But mostly, the resemblance depends on the depth and expression of anger. Narcissistic and borderline people do not fight relatively or consistently. Those men or women get nasty in a way you could never have seen before, unless you know somebody else who is borderline or narcissistic. When borderline and narcissistic individuals fight, they can use words as bullets, meant to hit you where you are most susceptible. Being extremely close to a person who is narcissistic or borderline means that you will be dragged into more high-emotion scenes than you can count, with tears shed, allegations thrown, and a desperate sense of confusion overall. Making the experience more complicated, borderline and narcissistic people constantly shift their emotions and argument points, and in some way manage to suggest that the start of the battle, or the general issue in the relationship, is you. What an astonishing and complicated experience. Many relationships with somebody who is narcissistic or borderline do not last, for clear reasons. Those with borderline or narcissistic personalities can learn to have lasting relationships only if they end up being acutely knowledgeable about their triggers and are willing to discuss their insecurities freely with a partner on a continuous basis. And once relationships suffer such severe psychological damage, most won't survive the blows. Life with a person who is narcissistic or borderline, someone who has not gotten enough amount of help, is too aggravating for many people to handle. If it is a member of the family who is narcissistic or borderline, it's a lot harder to walk away. If you have ever loved somebody who had either character type, you know that the injury takes a long time to recover, and that the sadness still comes back from time to time. Loving somebody who is narcissistic or borderline includes the buildup of a lot of unsettled anger and unhappiness, and these emotions are strong and lasting. With my clients, I have discovered that the saddest repercussion of loving someone with one of these personality types is that you come to question whether the narcissistic or borderline individual ever really loved you at all. After all, it deserves thinking about that someone inflicting so much pain on someone they apparently love may indicate that there never ever held true, consistent love in the first place. Ultimately, it's realizations like this that make the healing process from these relationships so intricate. It is fair to say that one is a victim of a serious borderline or narcissistic individual. I'm uncertain. On the one hand, I believe that it takes two to enact a relationship dynamic, no matter how dysfunctional it becomes. Meanwhile, narcissistic and borderline individuals do such a good job of seducing people that there could be a level of manipulation at work much of the time. Just how long does it require to heal from a relationship with one of these characters? It can take years, some or many, to truly recover the scars. For many loved ones, the experience leaves a trove of upsetting memories, impossible to shake in time. Chapter 9. The Borderline Dad. Dads with borderline personality disorder, or FBPDs, often vary from moms with borderline personality disorder, or MBPDs, in the attachment they have with their kids and the nature of the associated abuse. A primary difference between the two is that whereas MBPDs focus on their kids as primary attachment items with associated exaggerated dependence, FBPDs usually see their kids as secondary attachment items with less associated reliance. Borderline mother, exaggerated dependence on her children. Borderline father, overstated reliance on his partner. This is very important because if a borderline father is more likely to see his partner as a main and bothersome attachment object, the repercussion is that he might then experience his kids as hindering access to his main attachment thing and thus competitors for her love. FBPDs and babies. Gestation and childbirth interfere with his partner's ability to focus on the FBPD. Pregnancy and childbirth can distract the FBPD's partner in a number of ways. The FBPD typically becomes furious at the child and the mom of the kid just because the mom does not have interest, energy, and concentration on the FBPD that was there before the kids. This is a natural consequence of the demanding nature of early motherhood. Regretfully, as a consequence, this hinders the FBPD's attachment to the kid even before it is born and intensifies after giving birth. The FBPD experiences desertion associated with the withdrawal of the mother, connected with her taking care of the kid. They usually complain about sexual desertion, related to the typical momentary disturbance with sex related to pregnancy and childbirth. that becomes worse as the infant needs feeding and other care throughout the day and night, usually leaving the mom too tired to take care of the FBPD. Fathers without BPD often are comprehending and, in fact, find the mom's nurturance toward their offspring admirable and appealing. The FBPD finds this threatening and may become angered at the mother, the child, or both. In these scenarios, the FBPD may encourage or need that the partner overlook the child so that she may address his needs. FBPD. Let's go to our preferred dining establishment tonight for a great romantic dinner. Mother. What about the baby? FBPD. We can get a sitter. Mother. I feel that she's too young to be left with a sitter. She's still breastfeeding. FBPD. You can pump some milk. Mom. I just don't want someone else feeding her yet. FBPD. Perhaps having a kid wasn't such a good idea after all. In this dialogue, the FBPD is motivating the mom to violate her maternal impulse by deserting the kid briefly and then punishing her hesitation. He comes to see both the baby and the mom as obstacles to his access to his main attachment object, the mom. Acting out by the FBPD in the form of adultery is not unusual under these scenarios. The mother's attention to the kid is seen as abandonment, thus justifying his looking for love in other places. FBPDs and young children. As the child ages, the FBPD is more likely to bond to the child. The bond tends to be secondary, however, and focused mainly on the needs of the dad rather than those of the child. FBPD. How would you like to watch a football game with Daddy? Child. Don't you generally watch football with Uncle Tommy? FBPD. Yes, but Uncle Tommy can't make it today. Child. Okay. Later. FBPD. Where are you going? Kid. Daddy, this is boring. I don't want to watch anymore. FBPD. But the game is not over yet. Child. I want to play outside. FBPD. This is the last time I ask you to hang out with me. In this example, the secondary nature of the attachment to the child is instantly apparent as he asked to sit in for a preferred attachment object, Uncle Tommy. The child probably will leap at the chance anyway to have time with the father. In this situation, he fails and is then declined and made to feel bad about his efforts, and for this reason, himself. This typically triggers the child to be more solicitous the next time, while her or his confidence is reduced by being blamed for not pleasing the FBPD. This then justifies abuse in the form of desertion, devaluation, or perhaps even physical abuse. FBPDs and children. Hey, Father, I really need to validate you will be driving me to my game Saturday. FBPD. What time does it begin? Child. Same as weekly, 2 o'clock. FBPD. I might be several minutes late. Child. Dad, if I'm late, I can't begin. FBPD. You are putting pressure on me. Child. Father, you knew I had to be there at 2. FBPD. You unappreciative little piece of trash. You would not be in the league if it were not for me. In this example, the father has put some other chance ahead of being at his child's ball game. He is humiliated when the child faces him on this. His solution is to make himself the victim by making the kid feel badly about wanting his dad at the ballgame. FBPDs and the adult child. While the FBPD regularly treats his relationship with his kids as a secondary bond, he, however, expects the kid will have a primary bond with him. It infers that if he expects that the kid will make him initially top priority when there's a dispute. This may end up being more obvious as the child enters adolescence or young adulthood. FBPD. I really need a ride to the medical professional tomorrow at 10. Can you choose me up? Child. Did you just make this appointment? FBPD. No, my friend was supposed to take me, but something came up. Child. Father, I have a big interview tomorrow morning, and I cannot reschedule it. FBPD. Can you just move it up several hours? Kid. No, Father, it will harm my opportunities. FBPD. After all that I provide for you, I do not think that I ask too much. Kid. I'm pretty happy to take you to the doctors. I just really need advance notice. FBPD. I may not always have advanced notice. Child. But this time you did. FBPD. Oh, so I really need to make a visit to get ill. Kid. You are not sick. This is a routine visit. FBPD. Forget it. I'll ask your sister. Here, the FBPD was exercising his second option, just because his first choice, his good friend, fell through. He nevertheless expected the kid to drop everything and treat the father as a primary attachment. When the child does refrain from doing so, the FBPD ends up being violent. Like the female sufferers of borderline personality disorder, the FBPDs are intolerant of criticism and cannot take real responsibility for any error or defect. FBPD, the victim. Child. Father, when you finish emailing, I'd love to speak to you about something. FBPD. Proceed. I'm listening. Child. I will wait. I do not feel like you're listening when you're addressing emails. FBPD. Emails were okay when you needed cash for school, you thankless piece of garbage. Kid. I'm just trying to have a considerate conversation with you. FBPD. You are going to tell me how to be respectful? I wish I never had kids. Here, the FBPD responds to criticism with abuse. That is a characteristic pattern of both male and female victims. The kid is penalized for trying to work out a mutually respectful relationship with the parent. The FBPD is injured by any criticism from anybody. The pain activates instant rage, and the FBPD presumes the posture of victim. This invalidates any and all abuse to the kid, which is generally uttered instantly and without restraint. The kid's criminal offense of finding fault with the parent is enhanced to a felony. The FBPD treats the child like he or she has launched a vicious attack and responds with full ferocity. Paradoxically, regardless of the intensity of the instant vitriol that can be triggered by any perceived criticism or minor, these aggressive expressions are transitory. FBPD. Son, was there something you wanted to discuss with me? Child. That's okay. I looked after it. FBPD. I'm not on the phone anymore. Kid. Father, I already dealt with the problem. FBPD. Oh, so now you're going to punish me by not talking to me? Kid. Dad, it's not a punishment. I'm going to tell you if you really want to know. FBPD. Well, I actually do not. I have better things to do than talk to a loser like you. Here, the FBPD expects the kid to just overlook the abuse attachment just prior and share honestly with the parent. The kid is instantly in a problem that he is being asked to share openly with a parent or caretaker who has just recently brutalized him. He is then penalized for his natural response, hesitation, and then punished again for giving in too late. Women are 3 times more likely than guys to be identified with borderline personality disorder. This implies that there are a lot more FBPDs than MBPDs, but the men are no less upsetting. Their need to see themselves as foolproof compels them to assume the victim role when they feel criticized or slighted. They usually respond with a violent attack at the perceived wrongdoer. Making it through the borderline dad. Maturing with one or more parents or caregivers impacted with BPD causes considerable damage to the kid's sense of self. Relief can only be attained by stopping the abuse. This is done by setting up constant boundaries that don't enable this kind of abuse. Once this is achieved, healing of the self can occur by acknowledging the damage done by the abuse and recasting the relationship in more realistic terms. The nub of the issue is that if you have been raised by a borderline mom or dad, these behavioral scenes are your typical. First, you need to step outside the violent relationship sufficiently to realize what has been done to you. After all, children don't request for abuse from the people they really love the most in the world. After this, psychotherapy can assist with objectifying what is going on, setting good limits, and being the best daughter or son that you can choose to be under the situations. It's a fight that's worth the effort. Chapter 10. Borderline personality affects all races and both genders. Borderlines, we so need another term, have emotional instability, usually overreacting to the smallest of things. Interpersonally, they have abandonment and trust problems. They have an irregular self-image, unsuitable rage, chaotic relationships that mainly end badly, and some self-injure and/or are self-destructive, and that's just for starters. BPD can happen in typical families, though in today's world, what's typical may be a matter of dispute. But stats and scientific analyses indicate that many BPD cases develop in families with some degree of abnormality, dysfunction, or psychosocial structural challenges, whether real or simply perceived by the one afflicted. The National Institute of Mental Health, or NIMH, per the National Institute of Health, NIH, states on its site that the prevalence of BPD is 1.6% of the adult population, as they mention a 2007 study. According to many sources, BPD impacts approximately 1 to 6% of the population. I tend to lean toward at least 6%, perhaps even up to 10%. However, 6% relates to 14 million Americans. That isn't a little number. Specifically, according to the National Education Alliance of Borderline Personality Disorder, or NEA-BPD. BPD is more typical than schizophrenia and bipolar illness. BPD impacts up to 5.9% of adults. 20% of inpatients admitted to psychiatric healthcare facilities have BPD. 10% of outpatients have BPD. 10% of grown-ups with BPD commit suicide. 55 to 85% of adults with BPD self-injure their bodies, and inheritability of this illness is approximated to be up to 68%. Current stats also imply that BPD is more common in females, white females. This may solely be due to the fact that women are more likely to report for mental health services, while men may be more unwilling or resistant to do so. Consequently, readily available information is not always a true depiction of the disorder's occurrence and frequency, and we all need to remember that men and other races also suffer with borderline personality disorder. I periodically search many government sites for data, but about BPD, there is little to no information, certainly no current data, and no information regarding guys, women, nor comparative information for special populations of Blacks, Hispanics, and others. The only unique population bar graph pertains to 2002 data of prisoners with psychological health issues, reported in 2004. Compared to extensive present data provided on federal government sites for other conditions, like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, and STDs, there's generally no bar chart, no conversations, no links that directly point to existing research and data about BPD. Per my request, scientists at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Being Provider, or HHS, are looking into what, if any, current information they may have regarding BPD. I was asked to submit a BPD short article for another. I'll later publish the link, and I'm also preparing a book proposal about the topic. As a physician, and as one who met an otherwise funny and terrific man who, alas, is positive for all 9 BPD requirements and refused to get help, I have a two-pronged perspective of and experience with the disorder. I also created a BPD color flow chart that many like and others may find of interest. Because of my experience with the previously undiagnosed BPD patient who has so much emotional pain, I ended up being an advocate for increasing awareness of BPD. I applaud the steadfast efforts of Dr. Perry Hoffman at the NEA BPD and my coworkers Dr. John Gunderson and Dr. Blaise Aguirre, plus their staff at McLean Hospital in Boston, plus many others. I also applaud the NFL's Brandon Marshall, who in July 2011 courageously shared with the world that he has BPD. Given deep space of present main country information, efforts must be made to more advance the general public discussion of BPD, particularly in the hallowed halls of our government's health agencies. This year, as time permits, I'll work to accentuate the absence of BPD data and discussions with HHS, the NIH, and the CDC. I motivate them to figure out the incidence of BPD in guys, and I also want there to be a concentrated, nationwide effort in high schools and colleges about BPD awareness. I encourage others to work within your own community. Get in touch with city and county health departments. Another place of opportunity is with health officials at colleges, and that includes HBCUs, simply because I am also concerned and convinced that Blacks may have a higher risk of BPD, given the oft-contributing aspects regarding family characteristics and the sometimes fractured family structure. If present, many are undiagnosed. I once spoke about this on the nationally syndicated Tom Joyner Morning Show, and the reaction was remarkable, as people acknowledged the signs in some relatives, but didn't have a name for what their loved one was doing. Obviously, I suggested evaluation. There is treatment to manage BPD, but a diagnosis must precede. I respectfully encourage our federal government companies to designate staff and funds to advance the research study of the occurrence and incidence of BPD in this country, because what data they have published online is old, and many crucial and needed measurable criteria that would prove to be valuable to increase consciousness of BPD are non-existent or not yet reported. Given the continuous public discussions of mental illness, do not let BPD be left further behind. This has been Borderline Disorder: Symptoms, Deceptions, and Treatment by John Kirshen, narrated by Sarah Owens.